to the rotor. By 1941, he'd achieved uncanny stability with some very advanced helicopter models. Later the same year, Sikorsky sold his first helicopter to the Army Air Force. Not content with this achievement, he went on to experiment further. This helicopter had a single asymmetrical blade, like a giant wing. For fixed-wing pilots, even a tethered helicopter was a real handful. After refusing seat belts, this pilot was thrown through the rotor blades. He was lucky to escape with nothing worse than bruises. It happened during the early flights of Arthur Young's first full-size prototype. He'd built it for the Bell Aircraft Company, who had purchased the rights to his designs. After this setback, Young and Bell rapidly caught up with Sikorsky. The military were beginning to show interest in the idea of vertical takeoff. And 6 years after Hannah Reitsch's first indoor flights, a twin-seater Bell Model 30 gave a copycat performance for the American public. Despite this emphasis on military development, the idea persisted, helped by jolly newsreels, that the helicopter would eventually replace the car.
For everybody. Yes, it's a helicopter. It takes off from your garden and comes down anywhere where there's room for the propeller. You can learn to handle it in a few hours. This is a baby one-seater. And when it wants petrol, you just bring it down at an ordinary garage.
But helicopters were far from simple to fly. Even these primitive machines had fantastically complex control linkages from the fixed cockpit to the spinning rotors. One of Arthur Young's colleagues from the early years is consultant engineer Bart Kelly.
Well, basically there are two control systems which the pilot has to the main rotor. And one of them, the simplest one, is called collective pitch. And I'm making that motion now. You'll notice that both those blade grips turn, and they turn in such a way that it's merely like a variable pitch propeller of an airplane, and the blades will tend to bite into the air more or less. Now, the other control system is the swash plate, and the swash plate is a device which transfers the motion from the non-rotating fuselage, which the pilot can control, and the spinning control mechanism, which is hooked to the rotor. Now, I'm trying to hold the swash plate level there as I turn the rotor. But if I tilt the swash plate, no longer hold it level, I think you can see that the rotor blades, as they go around, are changing pitch because these little rods are moving up and down. The one toward me now is up, and over there it's down.
To produce these movements in a full-size rotor mechanism, the helicopter had cockpit controls that no other plane possessed. This Bell machine from the 40s had a layout that remains virtually unchanged to this day. The cyclic control can be moved in any direction, and through a system of levers forces the swash plate to the desired angle. The collective pitch control is a separate lever and changes the pitch of the blades collectively. The pilot's feet control the pitch of the tail rotor blades, which give the rotor more or less thrust against the tendency of the fuselage to spin against the direction of the main rotor. The main rotor blades are really thin wings, By whirling round, their leading edges cut into the air, and the aerofoil shape of the blades generate lift. To create extra lift, the pilot increases the blade's angle of attack with the collective pitch lever. Eventually, enough air is forced down to overcome the weight of the machine and lift it off the ground. In order to fly forward, the blade needs to tilt down towards the front. The pilot can force the swash plate to tip forward. This puts more lift on the rear cycle than before, so the blade flies higher, rising on its hinge. As it whirls round to the front part of the cycle, it's given less lift by the swash plate, forcing it to droop. The gyroscopic action of the blades will even out this rising and falling, and eventually the whole rotor disc will tilt to mimic the angle of the swash plate itself. With the air now moving back instead of just down, the helicopter moves forward. As forward speed increases, the fuselage, which is in effect hanging beneath the rotors, swings back and adopts a similar angle to the rotor. The blades are subject to enormous and constantly changing loads. Each blade leaves a tipped vortex of swirling air, which the following blade must chop through. The blades have to absorb these forces by bending. This film was taken with a camera strapped to the leading edge of a blade in flight. It's possible to see the tail rotor going past on each revolution. If the blades did not absorb these stresses, they would be transmitted directly into the fuselage, causing instability. Most of this mechanical torture is hidden from the pilot of a modern machine, although he still has to perform a delicate balancing act when flying the latest type of conventional helicopter. Bell's chief experimental test pilot, Ron Earhart.
ALB start. Second engine, number 2 engine. We turn the starter on. Open the throttle to flight idle. Monitor engine RPM. Get our generators on, inverters on, lights on.
We're doing a pre-flight check on a Bell 412, a civilian derivative of the military Huey.
And engine exhaust gas temperature starting to come up. We want to make sure it doesn't go over the red line. If it goes over the red line, I would abort it with the throttle. Okay, we've checked out all of our systems now, and the aircraft is ready to fly, except my rotor RPM is too low. I'm going to bring it up to the flight operating RPM by moving the beep switch forward. RPM increases, and we fly at 100% RPM. It's set now. To lift into a hover, we're going to increase the power by increasing the pitch on the blades with the collective control. Torque will go up from our on-the-ground setting to our hover setting.
Torque is helicopter terminology for power, and these days the power control is interlocked with the collective stick.
To lift off into a hover, I'll be lifting up on the collective stick, which will increase the thrust of the rotor. Okay, I'm starting to add torque now. As we add torque, the aircraft tries to spin opposite the direction of the rotor, which means I'll have to put in left pedal to keep the nose pointed straight ahead.
Remember, the pedals control the tail rotor.
Okay, I'm adding power now. Torque is going up. The nose is trying to turn right a little bit. I add left pedal to keep it straight ahead. And then I use the cycling stick to maintain a level attitude of the aircraft. See, the torque is up here now. To make the aircraft translate across the ground laterally, I move the control stick in the direction I want to go, and then let the aircraft bank and then come back to level. We'll move to the right here. There's a little right cycling stick. The aircraft banks right. We start moving to the right. Meanwhile, I use whatever pedal motion is necessary to keep the nose pointing in the direction I want it to point. Now, as we get to where we want to go, move the stick back to the left a little bit. Come to a stop, and then I move the stick as required to keep us level. And the same thing rearward. If we want to move backwards, I move the stick aft slightly, the nose comes up. I have to add power to keep the altitude, and we start moving backwards. Okay, I'll demonstrate a takeoff now, making a takeoff from a hover into forward flight. We get the aircraft aimed on our takeoff heading. Let the nose drop slightly, beginning acceleration. Add a little power so that we don't fly into the ground. We're now going through about 40 knots. We'll go to about 60 and then begin to climb. In 60 knots, I bring the nose up until we start a good climb. We're using still basically the hover power and climbing at 500 feet a minute. Now, if I want to climb faster, I can pull in more power. Once we're in forward flight, the helicopter flies very much like an airplane. If we want to turn left, we just roll the airplane left. Here I am at a bank angle to the left, and the aircraft begins to turn to the left. You can see on the heading indicator.
Veterans like Earhart can control helicopters with deceptive ease. And when no one is looking, these ungainly machines can fly with real abandon. This is the 10-ton CH-53. Today, loops and rolls are forbidden, but another, more dangerous maneuver is now standard military practice. It's called nap of the earth flying. It means literally inside the tree layer. The military believe it can protect crews from rocket attack and give an element of surprise. Nap of the earth flying, or NOE as it's called, requires concentration on the view out the window and not on the array of essential dials and controls in the cockpit. This has led to a research program which questions the whole cockpit layout for all helicopters. Project engineer of the Army Helicopter Improvement Program at Bell is Bill Bowen.
Our approach is to go to what we call multifunction displays. These are nothing more than cathode ray tubes, TV-type displays that are under computer control, and they have switches along the side that can be used to have any meaning depending on what mode the crew puts the display in. Now, dedicated or separately, we have vertical scale instruments. Now, these instruments are different from what the typical helicopter has today that are round gauges with needles. These are solid states, and they use light-emitting displays. The benefit of this type instrument over existing helicopter instruments and airplane instruments, too, is that whenever the scales are aligned and whenever everything is normal in the aircraft, the pilot only has to look in and he sees a horizontal line across or a horizontal scan pattern. He can quickly be back outside knowing the condition of the parameters on those displays. So as he flies and keeps his hands on the controls in the NOE environment, he can select any display that he needs on demand when he needs it by just flipping the button on the cyclic control. Therefore, we don't have to have dozens of instruments and control panels in front of him. He only demands what he wants from the CRT, and it gives it to him in the form that he wants to.
A push-button cockpit layout like this will fly later in the year. But even mundane button pressing may soon be unnecessary.
Arlington 58K, like to take off, stay in pattern.
Roger 58, change cleared 4 north. takeoff on Northwest 10.
At Sikorsky's Human Factors Laboratory, research is devoted to using the pilot talkback to communicate with voice recognition computers. Howard Harper.
Well, I'm wearing a standard Army flight helmet with a noise-canceling microphone, and this is connected to an experimental voice recognition system. Voice recognition systems work by dividing each word into a number of parts. For example, the word fuel. If it takes a second to say it, it will be divided into 16 equal parts. Frequency analyzers will determine the amount of energy in each of those frequency bands. This data is stored and forms a template which can be later used to match words which are said. First of all, we're going to set the system in motion, and then we'll go through a training period with it.
This training period would become part of the pilot's pre-flight check. After activating the computer, it will ask him to say key words or commands for flight information.
Attitude, engine, power, fuel. Attitude, engine, power, fuel. Attitude, engine, power, fuel. Attitude, engine, attitude, power, engine.
This type of interactive
Fuel.
display would relieve the pilot of the
Attitude.
button pressing during flight.
Engine.
Until he commanded information,
Power.
he would be faced with a blank console. But because a helicopter can fly up, down, forward, sideways, and backwards, the pilot must constantly feed in control movements with both hands and both feet. Human factors researchers are attempting to reduce these four controls to a single stick. Sikorsky's Dr. Bert Bertone.
This is a four-axis side-arm controller. The purpose of this device is to replace the sticks that the pilot presently has. The cyclic, the collective, and both rudder pedals. It allows him to fly merely using one hand. The stick has no movement to it. The sidearm controller is called a force field stick, and if the pilot wanted to pitch the helicopter forward, he would merely apply pressure to the back of the stick. If he wanted to pitch back, he pulls back on the stick itself. Roll is accomplished by pushing to the right or to the left, and the yaw control, moving the helicopter sideways, is accomplished by twisting on the grip. We replace the collective by an up and down movement, up for up collective and down for down collective. The display shows the pilot a runway configuration with a horizon line. He is hovering at the end of the runway at 200 feet, and the object is to keep the helicopter hovering in that position without flying down the runway or moving sideways. The two studies that we are involved in at the present time are being done for NASA. And one of the studies is called Pilot Interaction, Right-Hand, Left-Hand Interaction Study, in which we are looking at the right hand controlling the sidearm controller and the interaction that takes place when the pilot uses the left hand to either switch on radios or to move other switches in the cockpit. It is similar to the task of rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time. The second study that we'll be doing is called a cross-coupling study. Cross-coupling means that if you ask the pilot to pitch forward with the stick and with the helicopter, will he pitch forward and roll to the right or left simultaneously? This could be a serious problem in low-level flying.
Ultra-low-level flying is what this helicopter has been specifically designed for. It's the U.S. Army's prototype assault helicopter called Apache. It carries the very latest weapons, although in most respects it's a totally conventional machine, a direct descendant of those used in Vietnam. Its accuracy as a gunship is enhanced by the pilot's evil-looking monocle. This is really a gun sight and rangefinder. The monocle displays an image reflected from a small TV screen clamped to the side of his helmet. He looks at a tank, swings the helicopter round to bring the two diamond-shaped symbols together in front of him, presses the button, and according to this sales film at least, the tank is dead. It's a technology called head-up display, where relevant information is projected onto the pilot's field of view. This type is far too cumbersome for anything but military use, and even then there are doubts. But a miniature system could help pilots save lives when hovering in limited spaces. At Bell, electronics research engineer Hugh Upton.
The idea for the display came from a personal project that I have. I have a severe hearing loss, and I've been working on what I call a visual speech reader for the deaf. The idea was to build a system that the deaf person could wear in his everyday activities. It involves a miniature optical system which uses this collimating lens, this little speck that you see in my glasses. I have a microphone on my tie clip and a computer analyzer which extracts certain features from speech, such as high-frequency sibilants, which are shown as a red sound, back vowels, which are shown in green, or when you say that to me. And the heart of the concept is the fact that these flashing lights are actually viewed on your lips, so that when I see you talk and try to read your lips, I see the pattern superimposed on the lips. So the thought was, why not use the same technique to make a heads-up display for pilots, which is actually built into his eyeglasses, so that wherever he looks, he'll be able to see the information, even if he's doing a hoist mission, so that he needs to look down at the hoist operator. With this system we're working on, he will be able to see the information superimposed on the ground, or if he's looking forward, he'll be able to see it superimposed in the sky. Now, we have achieved that by using a light-emitting diode array, which has 128 diodes. And we attach a fiber optics ribbon that has one optic fiber for each diode. Through an electromechanical exciter, we vibrate the ribbon so that when we key on the light-emitting diodes in synchronism with that vibration, we actually see a raster.
The raster, or scan, will be invisible, but if an LED is switched on at a certain point, it will flash. If the LEDs are switched on at coordinated points in the scan, they line up. With the scan vibrating at the speed of Upton's prototype, the LEDs will merge to appear as a line. Remember, the scanning fibers would be invisible. The computer, coordinating vibration and switching, will scan these LED lines into any position and eventually reproduce the essential symbols for flight information. When the tiny raster is aimed through the miniature optical system on the pilot's glasses, he will see this information wherever he looks. But all of these new pilot aids are experimental. This, the latest military transport helicopter called Black Hawk, is, like the gunship, entirely conventional. Teams of workers make 10 a month. Over 300 have been built. The Army says it needs 1,100. Each helicopter needs about 11 miles of wiring for its modern electronic systems. Like embroidery groups of the past, these women tag, bind, color match and weave the tapestry of cables before installation in the fuselage.
Okay, leave it there. Now.
You're supposed to get it at 45, 47 to 48. You're not going to get it that high.
If the new pilot aids replace these conventional cockpits, more computers and even more wiring would have to be squeezed into the already cluttered fuselage. Apart from the extra complexity, the vulnerability of these electronics to interference and jamming is beginning to cause concern, and a research program that would replace most of these wires with fiber optics is underway at the United Technologies Research Center. Dr. Eli Snitzer.
Basically, the way in which the fiber works is, and I can show this here with this bundle of fibers, is that if you send light in at one end, the light is transmitted down the fiber with relatively low loss in light level and emerges at the far end containing whatever information one chooses to put on the light signal, for example, by a series of dots and dashes or a series of pulses which basically contain the information to be transmitted. In an actual application for the transmission of information, one would not use a bundle of fibers like this, but instead a single fiber, as is shown over here. Or the other essential function is to provide a passive sensor, which consists of a code plate, and you can see this code plate here. The code plate has a number of regions which are transparent, but arranged in a systematic